what frustrates me most is when people have not, and you can tell that they haven't really thought through the things like, why are we trying to do this? That's the thing. I think everything starts there, And so whenever people saying, well, this would be better than that. And it's like, so let me actually clarify that as a statement. There are certain statements that people make where they say, is this necessary? And it's like, that's not even correct English. Is this necessary to someone for something? Okay, that's a complete thought. Would this be better? Would this be better than what for whom? Right? And so I think the things that frustrate me the most are when people act like Chat GPT, where they just repeat words that they've heard. Oh, EFAs will save us money. Okay, like the guys who are saying that, many of whom are actually in departments of education, they've just heard this and they're just saying it and they haven't stopped to think it through, and they haven't. So that I think in that sense, the state as a general class, the things that frustrate me the most are where people are expressing things that aren't even thoughts. They're just words that they picked up someplace and carried around, and now they're dumping them on you, and they haven't. That they haven't thought about it, because if they had thought about it, they'd realize that what they're saying, not even that it's wrong. It's not even wrong. It doesn't rise to the level where you could say it's right or wrong, because there's no actual meaning in it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. And I am very fortunate to have the guest I have today. Fortunate to know him because I wasn't aware of him until I appeared on the Reason Show, Just Asking Questions, a few weeks back. And I got a lovely note from someone saying, hello, watched your show or watched your interview, and think you might be interested in these books that I've written and so on. We seem to agree on a lot of points. So I was offered copies of these two books. Here they are: Rethinking Fairness in Education by Ian Underwood, and Stop Lying About Education Savings Accounts, also by Ian. I don't know how to explain the feeling I had reading these books, but it was sort of along the lines of how I felt when I first discovered Ayn Rand's nonfiction and started reading about capitalism and reading about, just different things, reason, man's rights, and so on. I had this feeling of, I should have already known this, but I didn't. And now I can't unknow it and I can't unsee it. And same kind of feeling. Lots of things I've touched on this channel about education and fixing education and what's broken with education, but explained so succinctly, so simply, that it's just, I'll go so far to say impossible to refute. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I challenge you to read these books and come away saying, no, he's wrong. In fact, I think if I had money, I would literally pay you to read these books and do that, especially when it comes to the ESA discussion, which we'll get into. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Ian Underwood. Ian has degrees in mathematics and learning sciences. He has been a planetary scientist and artificial intelligence researcher for NASA, the director of the renowned Ask Dr. Math service, co-founder of Bardo Farm and Shaolin Rifleworks, a popular speaker at Liberty-related events, and is the author of Bare Minimum Books, where he currently has 17 titles. I will be working my way through the rest of them. I can promise you that, because I enjoyed these two so much. So without further ado and more of my yapping, let me welcome Ian Underwood to the stage. Hi, Ian. All right, where to begin? I think we talked before the show about starting with rethinking fairness in education, and I have a couple of questions to get us started. The first of which is, can you define, you did it in the book so beautifully, but for the audience, can you explain two things in order? One, why it's important that we define this word.
Okay.
And secondly, um, what your definition is. Because I mean, that's the longer answer. But the first one is, people are walking around thinking, fairness, but have we really defined it when it comes to education?
Okay, so taking the first part, I think it's important to define it because it is being used to propagate all the things that you hate. Everything that you hate about education gets justified by saying, but we have to be fair. We have to be fair. And normally, sort of as a secondary effect, fairness almost always ends up being about money, which absolutely has nothing to do with anything. So it takes you out of the realm where any solutions would be over it. So the joke about the guy, there's a cop's going down the street, he sees a guy crawling around in a parking lot, and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I lost my keys." So the cop's helping him look, and after a while he's like, I don't think they're, are you sure they're here? Did you lose them here? And the guy's like, "No, I lost them over in the park." And he's like, "Well, why are you looking here?" And he says, "Well, the light's better here." Right. And that to me just summarizes educational discourse. Everybody is looking in the parking lot, which is money, right? Because we know the light's better. We know how to set tax rates. We know how to figure out what we can tax and who will get too upset if we tax it. We know how to take money from people and give it to people and spend it on people. But that's not the answer. The answer is over in the park, and the answer is not looking at what we spend money outside the kid, but what is happening inside the kid, right? That's and so it's important to take back fairness, which is the point of that book, to just say, look, we have to give this a reasonable meaning again in something way that will help us.
Right.
For the word itself, it's funny because I actually gave a talk, which will turn into a book, about fairness, right? And so fairness, there are these examples of words that really you can't pin them down. Like game for a long time was a word like that, where it just, well, do you have to have a score? Does it have to take a certain amount of time? And fairness, as far as I can tell, I've come to believe it is not properly a word at all. It is an emotional trigger. All I use it for, all I want the word fair for, is if I can say that you're unfair, you're supposed to feel bad. That's all it means, right? So if this is unfair because we're not spending enough, then you should feel bad. If this is unfair because certain people aren't being treated nicely or their feelings are being hurt, well, that's unfair and you should feel bad. That's all it means. There is no sort of sensible definition of fairness where you can't just trot out 6 or 7 or 20 counterexamples of that. So that's not what it means. It doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. What it means is you should feel bad because I called you unfair. So the first thing is if we're going to use the word fairness, let's use it in a sensible way. And my preference would be, let's just stop using it. Let's just not talk
Yeah.
about what's fair. Let's actually talk about what problems we would like to solve and what might be solutions to those problems. But unfairness is not a problem that can be solved because nobody knows what the hell it means.
Right. I know it sounds trite, but we were taught as kids, life isn't fair.
Yeah.
But in a way, that's the only time the word fair makes sense, is to just tell people that nothing in life is going to be exactly the way you want it all the time. And the sooner
Yeah.
you get used to that and understand that life is about trade-offs, as Thomas Sowell
Right.
tells
Yeah.
us,
Yep.
then the happier you're going to be and the better you'll be able to tackle pretty much any problem in your life, because you'll look for the things that you have to trade. Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I picked up in this book, is that you did a great job of pulling out what we're actually talking about, both in terms of what an education is currently, like the thing they sort of claim to be working on, the
Yes.
thing that the state constitution says it should be,
Mm-hmm.
the thing that people are walking around thinking it should be. There are all these different definitions of education. And what you did was you said, all right, let's isolate this in a way that would be fair
Yeah.
to the people actually paying for it. If we're still in the realm of money, and
Mm-hmm.
those are the taxpayers, which is
Right.
everyone, not just parents. Let's look at, what should be, and so on. And I found that to be the most sort of opinion altering for me. Audience, just so you know, when I was sent these books, it was suggested that I might have a, slight change of view or on some things. And I actually did. What I mean by that is, I've been walking around as a homeschooling parent and a consultant advising other parents saying, you're not on a school schedule anymore. You can learn or not learn whatever, your child is interested in. Your number one goal is to make sure they can read and do basic math. Beyond that, they'll be able to learn whatever they want. So all of these things I say all the time about homeschooling and about what education ought to be in general, I've never actually even dreamed of applying to the school setting. I've been just as guilty as everybody else of accepting the paradigm that if we have schools, public or private or any other variety, they're going to follow this thing. And so when people, this cohort model, as you put it, where, oh, you're this age, you've got to be in this year. And in
The
that year,
astrology model. Yeah,
it's like astrology. You were born under this sign. You're going to learn, oh, it's geometry time. So, and as much as I've said, well, that's their model, I never proposed or even imagined proposing an alternative for real. I didn't have an argument. Now, what are we talking about here? Ian, help me out. Explain to the audience what I'm talking about.
Well, so like you said, if you are, as a homeschool parent, you have certain really non-negotiable goals, right? They have to learn to read. They have to learn enough math that they can learn more math, right? And ideally, they should learn enough about reasoning, whether that's formal logic or just studying, the kinds of fallacies that people tend to fall for, that they can make their way through other materials and not get pulled, in the wrong direction. And so the one-line summary that I like to use is the goal should be to make your kids hard to lie to, right? I can't lie to you by throwing a bunch of words at you that you can't understand. I can't lie by doing a bunch of calculations that you won't understand. I can't intimidate you. I can't push you around. That's what you want for your kids if you're a homeschooler. And all I'm saying is that's what we should be. If we're going to have public schools, if we're going to have places, that should be the goal there. Not that they learn about, 14th century French history, or they learn to play the tuba, throw a fastball, whatever. They should be learning enough that they can learn more. And sort of more importantly, rather than focusing on like the money, you just say, if we define what an adequate education is, that basically, and we could do that in a number of ways, but it might look something like, you should be able to read at a 10th grade level at least. You should be able to know enough math to look at a common statistical argument that somebody's going to make and tell whether they're jerking you around. You should be able to know the many ways that people will lie to you. If you can do those things, then in some sense you're done. And so all I'm saying is fair, if we want to use the word fair, is that every kid learns those things. And when they're done learning them, they go off and do whatever they want to do. And if they haven't learned them yet, they stay until they do. So the fairness is not everybody gets the same amount of money, but everybody gets the same education. And we're very clear on what that is.
Right. And I definitely want to talk about and even show the charts that you have that explain your process for just determining what's a nice to have versus a non-negotiable. Right. But even before we get into that, because I don't want to get too far away too soon from we shouldn't be talking about money all the time point. And so let's go back to that. You just mentioned the word adequate, which I think is very important because we're spending a lot of money on education in America, and we're not getting even what we're told would be the bare minimum, the literacy and the numeracy.
Right.
And you had in your book, you had several graphs, several charts, and I'm going to show a couple of them here. So we have, this is directly from the book.
Okay.
So this is the Cato chart, otherwise known as the Coulson.
Yes.
I've shared it. Lots of people have shared this. It's pretty clear what it is. It goes through 2012, but still relevant. Look at, this is spending. The blue is spending, and these are the different subjects.
Yes.
Flat or down.
Yes. Yeah.
They just don't really change no matter how much we spent. So then what you did that I thought was compelling is, so you said that then you plotted them here. So we've got different, these are all different states, right?
Right. So this is one particular test, like I think it's 4th grade reading for some year, but they all look the same.
Right.
So you see a bunch of these things, and you've got different states, and it looks like, oh my God, some of these states are doing so much better than others.
Well, except the bar for passing is still way above the highest dot.
Exactly.
So what you can't see in this graph that well is that there would be a line up here that says passing is like it's up between the two top lines. No one is achieving at that sort of adequacy. They're all below that. But more importantly, look at the amounts of money they're spending.
Right.
And you make that really obvious when you have this rectangle that shows a bunch of states paying widely different amounts to get the same not passing results.
Mm-hmm.
And then you showed here we have a bunch of states getting wildly different results for about the same money. Right. So again, I'm reading this book going, how can somebody come to any other conclusion? There's the dotted line of what passing is. And look at all this. So every one of these states, my takeaway is that in every one of these states, there are politicians every single year arguing that they should spend more. I really don't ever hear anyone talking about spending less. Some people don't talk about spending at all, maybe, but they'll almost always talk about we need to spend more or redistribute it differently. Like the money is going to solve the problem, ideally more money. But here we see clearly that doesn't make any difference. And then what you did that was genius is you put the dots, you sort of change the vertical axis. So now if we show the whole thing, these differences are actually negligible. They look big when you put it out like that. So it doesn't matter what you spend, you get the same results. And then, of course, your conclusion is, will more money help? No.
No, it won't.
How much money should we be spending? It doesn't matter because it's not working. We spend, the answer is it's the wrong question. Like you said, it's the wrong question. Money is not what we should be talking about.
Right. It's the parking lot. Money is the parking lot.
It's easy to look at. It's crystal clear. We spent this much. The test scores show this. Yeah. But what I don't understand, and maybe you can help me understand this, why, it seems so obvious. And yet you can tell people this and they'll still say, yes, but if we spent more money or we spent the money differently, we will get different results. We'll get better results. We're like, nothing in history shows that to be true. You have absolutely no evidence of that. Why do they keep doing it?
It's an excellent question. I wish I had a better answer. I think it's just as I think it was Samuel Johnson said, talking about remarriage. He said it's the triumph of hope over experience. And that's what this is.
But that makes sense.
There must
Getting
be
remarried.
Well, okay, but think about this. You went back and married your school 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 times, and you didn't learn, right?
Yes, that's true.
And that's the triumph of hope over experience. Well, next year it will be better, or if we just change this thing. So one of the blog posts I wrote was great. I was talking about a speech that Albert Nock gave at the University of Virginia, where he's basically talking about, look, we have all these educators. They're saying, we change this, we'll change this. None of it's working. He gave it in 1930. Okay. So this is not a new situation. This has always been happening. And I think it's because the people, the people running the show make promises that are very vague. They're very aspirational. Go and read some mission statements for some schools, and like the mission statement for the worst school in New Hampshire is just glowing. We're going to provide a rigorous education with, the community, everything. And you're just like, that isn't even within a light year of what you're doing. And I would love to see some of those mission statements made more realistic, like our mission is to keep your kids alive from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and to make sure that they don't, get harmed. And if we have the chance, we will teach them some things, because then you'd know what you're paying for. And you're like, wait for that. I'm giving you $19,000 or 23,000 or 25 or whatever it is now. You wouldn't do it. But if they tell you what we're going to do is allow every child to, flower and bloom and thrive, and we're going to have whatever, that sounds good. And
Well, it
and
not
why
only
aren't they
sounds
doing it?
good, it makes parents feel, in my opinion, like if your child isn't thriving, blooming, whatever the word is of the day, that it's your child.
Yeah.
There's
It's,
something amiss with your kid, which then leads to all
oh,
kinds of other problems.
I thought you meant it's your child and we need to spend more money on your child.
Well, it depends what day of the week it is. So, if it's like they're talking directly to you and it's a Friday and you're wondering why your child just failed a test or whatever, well, that's your child and that's your
Right.
problem. And maybe you need them assessed for a problem. Maybe they have mental health issues. And then after they put you through their self-designed assessment that obviously results in something is wrong with your kid
Yes.
because there's every incentive in the world, now we need more money because we've just identified that there's a problem where your child can't learn the way we're teaching. It's the onus is on you to spend more money or the society to spend more money. It's not the way we're teaching. It's not the school. It's not the subject matter. It's nothing to do with us.
But there is something, so I'm thinking there is a thing that's related, and one of my books talks about this. It starts by talking about Michael Pollan, who defined a thing called nutrition, which is basically the experts convincing you that you cannot feed your family without our help because
I
you're
mean, you
just
cut out for a second.
dumb.
Nutrition.
Oh,
What's it called?
nutritionism. It's
Oh, okay.
taking something that people have been doing for thousands of years, namely feeding themselves and their families, and convincing you that if you're not an expert, you can't do it. So you have to rely on the experts. And then exactly the same thing has happened. I call that educationism, where they have spent a lot of time and effort convincing you that you need to come to the experts. So it's not even an option as, well, let's hire people who don't have as much expertise. No. We need to have the people who have gone to the teachers' colleges, who have the master's degree, who have the PhDs. These people need to tell you what education is, and sort of more importantly, why you're not, you're just not up to the task.
Right.
So if it's not, I could do it, we should do it, there are many ways to do it. If it's just, this is the way it has to be done because that's what the experts say, then what other options do you have to consider except, well, let's give them more money to do more of what they're supposed to know how to do. So I think that is actually a part of it, that we've sort of, and this is a society-wide thing. It has to do not just with teaching your kids and feeding yourself. It has to do, well, I can't fix my own car. I can't wire my own electrical outlets. I can't patch this. I can't fix that because
Can't build your own house. That's for sure. There's a whole movie about that one.
Yeah, I'm not an expert. And
Right.
so there's this, and I call it the cult of expertise. So I think that is part of what's going on. If you have become part of the cult of expertise, your only real option in any situation is to try to get the experts to do better. And since in theory they're already doing as well as they can, the only way to sort of prompt them to do better is to give them more money.
Right.
So all the other avenues of discourse have sort of been cut off. And I think that it's not that people would be doing this in another situation. I think they're in a context, in a situation that encourages them and demands that they take that. Right.
Right. Exactly. The other thing that you did hone in on was the Constitution. Like you referenced the New Hampshire Constitution in your book because that's where you are, I assume.
Yes.
And you mentioned what it says in the language about why there's public education. And what I found interesting is, and everyone should know this, states do not all use the same language.
No.
So I was actually impressed that New Hampshire mentioned how education is important. And I kind of want to read it because it's different than the one in North Carolina. I don't have that one memorized, but it's not what yours says. And I wish it were, because a lot of states don't get the specific, and I'm not sure it would work. You have a section in the book called "Why Are We Doing This Again?" And it's in that section where you mentioned that the point, isn't to make sure that each child reaches their full potential. The point of it isn't to prepare them to get a high-paying job or to go to college, But in point of fact, if we go to your own constitution, it says, let's see if I can find this. And according to our courts, the point of this, the point of all this, and the justification for using taxes to pay for it is to create educated citizens so that we can remain free.
Yes.
And I wish all the constitutions said something like that. I think different states have different language. Some of them just say, for the benefit of the society, the very like loose language. Yeah. But when you get right down to it, I don't care what state you live in, this is the only justification I can imagine for having a taxpayer funded public education system, that you have educated citizens so that we can remain free, not so they can be educated, but so that we, the people, can remain free, that our rights are protected. And you made the point that as a taxpayer, your rights are in constant danger if you're surrounded by people who are illiterate, innumerate, or irrational, kind of like now. Anyway, and any one of those conditions, we have all three, but any one of those can, prevent someone from participating intelligently, and so on. And so when you look at education through that lens and you define adequate using that lens, it looks very different than what we're doing right now, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it looks completely different.
And I'm just wondering, how did you, like, it's, once I saw it in your diagrams, I'm like, this is so obvious. Why didn't I see it? How did you first realize it? Or have you just always known that? Because a lot of people will be surprised when I show them the charts.
I mean, so I came to everything sort of through guns. I didn't care about politics at all. And I have a book about this where I bought a gun and suddenly I was being treated as a criminal. And I'm like, what? Why? Wow. I've been a model citizen and now suddenly you think I'm going to shoot up a McDonald's? This makes no sense. That was when I started reading, right? Ayn Rand and the Federalist Papers and L. Neil Smith and all these things.
Right.
So I've always come at things from guns, and at some point, and I wish I remembered the actual, I'm sure it was just, I was discussing something with somebody and I made this connection. And for me, the connection is actually, if you look at the Second Amendment to the federal Constitution, you look at Article 83 of the New Hampshire Constitution, they are saying essentially the same thing. If you want to be free, you must be educated so you can know when they're trying to take your freedom away, and armed so that you can do something about it. And so to me, from that moment on, those were just two sides of the same coin, right? You need the tools to resist government overreach. And at that point, once you realize that, you're like, so the only proper role of government is to keep its hands off completely.
Right. Or to protect rights, keep someone else's hands off of you.
Sure. But it's not their job to keep other people could try to disarm you and you could defend yourself.
Oh,
but
no.
You want the government
to
step in and say, well, we'll decide what arms you can have. We'll decide where you can have them. We'll decide all this. And so I tend to just look at those in the same way. So it's like, if you make a list of all the reasons why the government should keep its, just stay out of, the right to keep and bear arms, those are all the same reasons why it should stay out of the right to an education. It's a right to an education. It means nobody can stop you from becoming.
It's not they have to give it to you.
Right. They don't give it to you. I have the right to be armed. It doesn't mean somebody's going to buy me guns and buy me ammunition, buy me training. It means if I choose to do those things,
sure,
the government in particular can't step in and say, well, you're limited in these ways. In the same way, if I want to become educated, and the world we're in now, I mean, it's never been easier. If I want to educate myself, the government should not be able to step in and say, well, you can't do this. But there's no positive role there at all.
Right.
So that's the way that I came to that, was by way
it makes perfect sense, though.
The Second Amendment. And so if I think of education as sort of a mutual self-defense thing, then it's, and I would like it if all my neighbors were armed, and I might do something like set up a volunteer, and I do this kind of thing. I encourage people to buy guns. I let them come over and shoot at my place. I train them, because I want them. That's for my benefit. Sure. They're beneficiaries, but it's really for my benefit because I want to be surrounded by people who have guns and know how to use them.
Makes sense. Unless they have some personal aversion to it, right? You know, some
Sure.
people just don't
Yes.
trust themselves to be around
Yeah.
firearms. And by all means, like, don't, but it
Yeah.
benefits you that much more that somebody nearby is comfortable and is confident and, you know, willing to protect the neighborhood or whatever.
Right.
Now, the other thing I love that you did was you changed the sort of the 3 R's to the 3 I's.
Uh-huh.
And you have, you know, illiteracy, innumeracy, and irrationality. And I
Yes.
think it would behoove all of us to start thinking about these 3 I's when we think about education and, you know, ask, is it getting done? Because if you just go by the test results, the answer is no. And then you went on to talk about the different subject matter areas
Hmm.
and whether or not there was a connection to them protecting us
Hmm.
from these 3 I's. This
Right.
was a great process. It took me a while when I was reading the book. I struggled. I'm not going to lie. I struggled because I'm such a history. I love history and in particular American history. And so, you know, seeing a question mark in there, but you made an excellent point in that what version of history?
Yes.
1619 project or, you know, Hillsdale or, you know, what are we talking about? And that might surprise people. Same for civics, same principle.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to rhetoric, you got a check mark there because as you just pointed out before, if you don't learn the tricks that people might use to lie to you, to
Exactly.
manipulate you, you are going to be easier to lie to. So that, you know, most people be shocked to see a question mark next to history and a check mark next to rhetoric. But here we are. And it makes perfect sense when you think of it
Yeah.
in that framework that if education is supposed to keep us free, then some of these subjects just don't really get it done. Arithmetic, yes. Algebra, maybe not. Geometry, maybe not. And so on. And then you went on to take it a little farther because those connections that are less obvious, like history,
Hmm.
civics, and you said, you said one. So rhetoric was bypassing reason, and that not all math enhances numeracy. And I never thought of it that way before. I've been a big, you know, kids should be able to take as much math as they want. They
Yeah.
who's holding them back arbitrarily? And then I realized if school weren't supposed to be all things to all people, it would be irrelevant. If they learned arithmetic properly, they could go on and learn all the way to calculus all by themselves without the taxpayers funding the exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. I
So
mean, there
get the
is a
one thing done
yeah.
correctly.
Yeah. So, and you know, the rhetoric in some sense, I would say, yeah, I love history. I want kids to read history. I want them to do the reading. I don't want to pay somebody to stand up and explain to them the cherry picked version that they like. I would like them to be able to read all the versions. And rhetoric prepares them for history
Right.
because anybody who writes a history book is putting some things in and leaving some things out and trying to tell a certain story for a certain reason. And
Right.
you'd better be prepared for that.
That's right.
So there is nothing, you know, where rhetoric doesn't prepare. Even in sciences, there are people who are trying to make, you know, sketchy arguments about things, and you need to know, oh, I see what he's doing. He's appealing to my emotion here. Oh, I see, he's connecting this idea with a person that I'm supposed to hate, therefore I'll hate the idea. Okay, no, I'm not going to let him do that.
Uh-huh.
Right. So that's why, yes, I think rhetoric is, you
That
know,
makes perfect
it's
sense. And yet they
way up
get
there.
zero rhetoric instruction. And
Oh
then you
yeah.
make the point, you know, things that people cling to and they'll send out flyers every year. They're gonna defund music and art and put it to
Right.
something else, blah, 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 blah. Like it's the worst thing ever. And we talk about, oh,
Right.
kids who don't learn music and don't learn art are just, you know, hollow and empty and all these things. But you know, your point is that if you learned those other subjects, you know, reading and
Mhm.
math and so on, you can go teach yourself music. You can go learn music any number of other ways and so on. And so then the chart starts to change. I'm not going to, you know, I want everyone to go get the book for themselves. So I'm only going to show a couple of the charts. Where now you've added a commandment.
Right.
You've added a commandment to this list here, where you said if something isn't essential enough to be mandatory,
Right.
that taxes may not be used to subsidize. I love this. If it's not essential enough to be mandatory, if you don't think that you could justify putting a gun to somebody's head or some kid's head and saying, you have to take music, you have to take art.
Right.
And by the way, they do that though. They do make these electives mandatory. So it is kind of crazy that we've gotten to the point where and nobody stops to think about it.
Right.
You're mandating that a child cannot graduate until they've taken fine arts. That
Right.
sounds like a make work project for a teacher,
Well,
you
it
know?
is, and this is an important thing, and I sometimes am not as clear as about this as I perhaps should be. People will then start talking about, well, you have to take music, the subject of music, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, like, what are specific knowledge and skills and learning in music that you think like, if everybody needs to be able to recite, the musical scale, that's a skill. Everybody's got to do this. And if it's okay for some kids not to be able to do that, then you know what? We don't need to make anybody do it. That the people who want to do it will handle it on their own. So that is one of the ways that something like this could get derailed. Oh, well, everybody has to take technology, and some kids are building robots and some kids are learning to make a small spreadsheet. That's not learning technology. That is, as you say, a jobs program for technology teachers. So yeah, I'm being very specific. If there is a thing you need to know how to do, you need to know
Within
how
that
to do it.
subject.
Yeah, within that subject. So I'm much more at talking at the level of individual competencies,
Yeah,
right? That if I give you a basic equation, you should be able to graph it. Now, that doesn't mean you passed an algebra course. It just means that your life is going to be filled with situations where people are drawing graphs, and you'd better know what that means,
right,
right? So whether you do that in an algebra class or you just watch some YouTube videos or whatever, you had better have that piece of information.
right.
Um,
And then inevitably there'll be people who say, but shouldn't, isn't it important for us as taxpayers to make sure that students are exposed to a wide variety of things during the time that they're kept, because we take their freedom away and lock them in the building,
well,
that they're so that they're not, they can use their time to learn to whatever, and then go on and pursue these other things you think they're going to learn on their own. And then I come back to, well, then maybe the real question you should be asking is, should we be locking them in a building for 8 hours a day?
sure. Right. The kind of education I'm talking about, that might take 3 hours a day, 2 days a week or something.
Right.
It's
And then if
not.
people are honest and say, like you
Yeah.
said, well, we're going to keep your kids alive. It's basically daycare. So you can go to
Mhm.
work and we will have some warm adult responsible bodies in the
Yes.
room and we'll make sure they don't kill each other. And like you said, while we have some time, we'll learn to read, we'll provide them with some books or whatever.
Right.
But they don't do that. They
Right.
they keep them all day and they resist calling it daycare.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Although, I mean, it's sort of an aside, but there's a town near us, Claremont, that's going through a huge crisis because they stopped doing audits for many years and suddenly discovered that they are $5 million in the red and they don't know what to do. But
They canceled their non-mandatory classes.
oh, well, they did cancel the non-mandatory classes. But wait, I lost a thread there. Why did I bring up Claremont?
Was it
What's the
day
last?
to do with daycare?
Yeah. So in one of they started having these meetings, the school board meetings, trying to explain what's going on, what's happening, how we're going to deal with it. And the head of the school board at one of the early meetings stood up and said, our first priority is to make sure the kids have a place to go so parents don't have to worry about that. I mean, she just came right out and said it. Our first priority. It's not that the kids learn something. It's not that they get the opportunity to learn something. It's that we give parents a place to put their kids. I mean, that's as close as she didn't actually use the word daycare, but she walked all
Right,
the way around it,
right,
and I was just like, okay, at least we have somebody on the record now saying that is the most important thing. That is our number one priority.
right,
So, yeah, as I'm always saying, if people would just come out and have the honest conversation about what they're doing, then you could have honest conversations about what it might or might not cost,
right.
right? Um, so
And
yeah,
that
but the
that does
mandatory thing is
disqualifies a lot of things that we take for granted.
it does.
I used to say, like, bring back vocational tech and bring back a lot of us have said that for years, like, oh, these were good things, but your book made me realize, like, no, Deb. Those are nice to haves. And if the kids know how to
Yes.
read and all this and their time isn't locked away in
Yeah.
a building, they could go learn these things on their own through
Yeah.
many other means. And then you added another commandment, which was, even better because you're talking about history and so on. And you make the point that I've made many times in many videos that one of the problems I have with public education, taxpayer funded education, is you are never going to get people to agree. It's inherently political because it uses taxpayer money. And as long as people are arguing over the minutia of whether it's going to be 1619 or it's going to be something else, which textbooks we're going to use, whatever, that somebody is going to be walking around saying unfair, not right, and the politics are baked in. There's no way to get it out because of these choices. And so you made the point that second commandment, if there is significant disagreement over what should be learned. Now, this is very important. It's very different from what should be taught. What should be learned, what the child is going to take from this and be able to do when they're done. And I really need to stress that because you stress that in the book. And I want the listeners to understand that what is taught is not synonymous with what is learned.
It's learned. Yes. It's two different things.
They're two completely different things. And we have people who can't agree on either. They can't agree on what it will be taught, and they can't agree on what skills shall be learned and performed and demonstrated on a test. And for proof of that, show up to like any meeting where they're discussing either how the assessments will work or if they're even going to have them or grades, and then show up to the conversation about which textbook they're going to use. Same thing. And what gets tested gets taught and so on. And so this is a constant seesaw, which is inherently political. And so your commandment is if there's significant disagreement over what should be learned, taxes may not be used to subsidize teaching it. Well, my goodness, that gets rid of a bunch of stuff.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And now we just have this little list here of reading, writing, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, statistics, and science. And even within science, I bet you would narrow that down probably to like
I think I do talk about
a little bit of biology.
Right. I mean, so no, there's no political disagreement over what the scientific method is and how it works, right? There is the method itself. I mean, it's been clear since Francis Bacon, you know.
Oh no, I agree with you. I'm just saying lately, I'm not so sure everyone else agrees.
Well, and so, you know what, and that might, if things have gotten wild enough, then that might actually disqualify. But you would have to find the individual, what can we actually agree on, right? But then you start to disagree on things like creationism. And it's weird because you'll even higher math, you'll even start to see people arguing that is, you know, there's privilege associated with that. And there are, you know, it teaches a certain mindset that isn't the right one. So great, you know what? But I don't think anybody is fighting about how to add two fractions. I don't think anybody's arguing about how to graph a function, right? I don't think anybody's arguing about how to tell whether something is growing faster than something else. Okay, those are the kinds of things. We're not fighting about that. As soon as if there's one or two crazy people, and I think I proposed this somewhere that like you should always almost in the same way that an experiment has a control. If you're actually going out and polling people, how many of you are opposed to this? You should also add like, oh, and are you opposed to, you know, making sure the kids can read and write? Because if they are, then it's just like, okay, that's like tainted blood supply. You're just like, okay.
Right.
Or it just tells you like, okay, the level of crazy is 3.5%. So that's the level at which it's more than 3.5% of people are complaining. Then there's some actual valid concerns in there.
Right.
But those are details, right? I'm just trying to establish the idea, which is if people are fighting over it, then whoever happens to be in charge of government should not be using tax money.
Right. And I would say, and you know, I'm sure we could have a whole other conversation about this, but within reading and writing, if you ever paying attention to the Association of the Teachers of English, right? There's a whole association. The things that they're saying about the teaching of, you know, English language arts, so to speak, make it pretty clear that whether it's how we're going to teach reading, we're going to use phonics, we're going to use whole word, all the way to which books are we going to allow the children to read during this reading, you know, lesson or instruction or whatever. And then with writing, same thing. I'm seeing people talk about, you know, grammar is racist and spelling is oppressive and all of these things are, we need to not teach them because it's harmful and hurtful and perpetuates suppression. And so we do even things we think we
Yeah.
didn't have disagreement on, we're having disagreement on. Now, not
Right.
parents, and maybe not the majority of taxpayers, but a sufficient number of teachers and
Yeah.
activists and politicians that it's difficult to even have the conversation about, can we all agree the kids need to learn to read?
And
Because they'll
right.
say, define reading.
And that's why I'm suggesting the craziness threshold. So
Yeah.
you have some idea where you can say, okay, look, this many people are just nuts. So anything below that level, we're just not going to worry about it because these people are obviously out to lunch. But the interesting thing is, if let's say that actually happens and people just start fighting and fighting and fighting, and that means the set of things that we agree on gets smaller and smaller and smaller, eventually gets to the point where people are like, why are we even doing this? Just teach the kids at home, and then you get exactly what you want. So this is actually a pathway where you are. So there's a thing, I don't think it was Milton Friedman, I don't know who said this, but he made the point that capitalism is a kind of alchemy where you turn greed into good. Because if I'm greedy in capitalism, the way that I make a bunch of money is I help a bunch of people, right? You can get, as Zig Ziglar would say, you can get anything you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And so this is a way to turn craziness into freedom, right? If you set up the framework where, great, you want to fight about something, anything we're fighting about, we're not going to use taxes for. And then that gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And at some point, the parents themselves are just saying, like, why would I even bother with this? If I'm teaching my kid this, why don't I just start with reading and just kiss that goodbye?
Well, and I like it that it's not saying let's open it up to a vote.
Right.
Because that is just, I'm sorry. We cannot vote people's rights away because that's an easy way to get around disagreement.
Yes.
If there's that much disagreement that, it's literally like 50-50, we got to get that one person,
right.
That's not something we should be subsidizing, period.
No, this is more like blackballing at a sorority, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, yeah, if we got 5 people who really hate this person, then okay, you might be a perfectly nice person, you don't get in. And that would be, whatever it is, whatever part of a set of competencies that people are really objecting to it. And then, of course, it's incumbent upon everybody else to look at that and go, what are they actually objecting to? Like, I'm just trying to get them to have a bigger vocabulary. How is that bad? Right? I'm just trying to get them to understand sentence structure. How is this bad?
Well, and that's where we come right back to the money, because if there's a giant pot of money to be redistributed for this thing called education, then there will be people who want some of it. And they'll go into teaching or being an administrator or something like that to get their hands on their piece of that pie. And you're not always going to get, some of the people who do that will be wonderful people who really committed to doing it the right way and all that. And a fair number aren't, especially with all the protections that come with that kind of job, thanks to unions. So you have people whose motivation for objecting is completely self-serving. It has nothing to do with the reason they're giving you that it's oppressive and this and that. What they're basically saying is, I don't know grammar. I don't know how to teach grammar. It's hard. Yes. I find it boring. So I'll come up with a reason the kids don't need to learn it, and then I don't have to teach it.
Right. So again, nothing is perfect. There are always going to be details. And this is why I call the books bare minimum books, right? I'm not going to present a plan, because in my experience, the most important thing is to get people to realize there's a problem. And then they can talk about what the plans are, right? So like in this case, I'm trying to get people just to realize that, like, you know what, if we're focusing on money, that's wrong. So maybe we should focus on something else. I can give you some suggestions, but if you're focusing on something else, that is the first huge step, right?
Well, that's why that's the only reason I bring up the sort of minutia, is that if you're really struggling with this idea of we're not going to subsidize something we disagree on that much, understand that that's where you get all these other little things that are hard to talk about. So get back to the first principle of, should we be spending money on this? Like, just stay there. Don't leave that. Don't be in a big hurry to run off and, discuss other things. if you're going to be going 10 rounds over it, the answer is no. It's just by default no.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you figure out a way to build some kind of consensus on it later, we'll have a conversation. But right now, the answer is no. I mean, parents understand this. We do this with raising kids, multiple kids all the time. When they have to share something, they have to do something or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, if you can't, I'm not, go away and come back when you can have a solution. I'm not getting in the middle of this. And it's similar.
And that's where that educationism idea comes in, that you convince parents that they're not qualified to do that. And eventually we'll get to parentism, which will be the third step in that, where you won't be allowed to make those decisions for your kids. You will have to call the department of whoever to say, I'm having this problem, tell me what to do, and they'll send somebody over to administer.
Well, we already have that with healthcare.
Well, this goes beyond health. This is just, fighting over a toy.
Oh, no, you're right. But what I'm saying is they've already moved towards that with community schools, and it's a whole other show. But so, and I think to wrap up this section, the thing I love about this adequacy, the adequate education, and this way of narrowing it down to like, if we're going to have money involved in this at all, this is how we decide what serves all of us, what is truly a public service and what warrants subsidy. And that would be these things that keep us free, make kids hard to lie to, and that prepare them for every possible other curriculum. So all those things you think are nice to learn, nice to have, pursue a career, blah, 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 they will be well prepared to do any of that on their own dime, their own time, whenever it suits them. And yay, like that's terrific. But the reason that we, the people, should have any involvement in it is so that we can stay free. I did want to ask you one little question about that and just get your take. What would you say to people who think that in addition, that's a given to keep us free, but in addition, there's something to be said for cultural reproduction? In other words, that, well, let me narrow culture down to being illiterate, being literate. Okay, so we're illiterate people who value the written word. I consider that part of culture. We value civil discourse. So that's kind of in there, with rhetoric and so on. And we value self-sufficiency, self-reliance. Let's say those are the core cultural components that we want to reproduce. I'm suggesting that another great thing about your model is it achieves that. So in other words, in addition to the nice practical function of keeping things to where they are, affordable and likely higher quality as well, and not violating our immediate, our rights, they will add that benefit of keeping us that.
And I would expect people to say that. My first question in response to that would be, what do you mean by we when you say we? Okay. Do you mean all Americans? For example, we could say we won World War II. I didn't. We went to the moon. I didn't.
True.
Right? We invaded this country or that country, or we are sending arms to this country or that. I didn't do it.
Right.
Okay. So that's a very tricky slope to head down when you start saying we value this. And the second thing I would say is, you have things like religions, and that is their business. They are in the business of, preserving cultures. That's what they exist for. It is not a thing that is necessarily so I would say then, in the same way, if you make a list of all the reasons why the government should not be promoting this religion or that religion, I would say turn that around. And it's the same argument against putting a government in charge of teaching culture. The culture, when I think about the culture I want, it is a culture where people ask a lot of questions and just don't take things for granted. So the way to get that is not to teach people in a way that suggests that there is a right way to do things.
Yeah, I was just thinking more in terms of, keeping that cultural focus very narrow and saying, like I said, valuing the written word. If you're going to teach people to read, you obviously think that reading is important.
Yes.
And if you want to teach people rhetoric, you obviously think that discourse and discussion and, like not just fighting it out, duking it out is important. And being able to reason through your problems and so on is important. The reason that's front of mind for me right now, of course, is things that have been happening in the last few weeks where people have made it abundantly clear that, pedagogies like critical pedagogy have worked on them, and they genuinely believe words are violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that certain works of literature, certain speeches, certain people who speak words should be dealt with violently because of the words they're speaking. That to me seems anathema to the American experiment.
Yeah.
And, so that's what I meant by cultural reproduction. It's just we're
Right. But
producing
now,
kind of a thing that
imagine that those people get put in charge of cultural reproduction.
they are.
Well, okay, and look how that's working out. I would suggest it's better to have nobody in charge of it. That culture takes
Oh,
care
no,
of itself.
for sure. I was just saying for those people who claim to want it, that what we would say is, with our argument back to them would be, what do you mean by cultural reproduction? Because this way, the way you're describing, absolutely reproduces a free culture, a
Yes.
free people. Was
Yes.
there something more that you wanted? And then it would be incumbent on them to say the stuff they want. And then we could go back to them and say, that's all within your religion, or that's all your
Yes.
private stuff. I've told parents this. Well, they'll say, well, I want my kids to think that gender is fluid. And it's not. Like, then do it on your own dime and your own time. No one's going to stop you. This is America. You have freedom of speech. Knock yourself out. But we shouldn't be subsidizing because what is essentially a belief, not a fact.
Right, but then this goes under the second commandment, which is, if it's something we're going to fight about, then
Exactly.
just stay the hell out of it. And it's exactly to have that as a policy, as a sort of axiom ahead of time, so that when these discussions come up, you can say, well, are we going to fight about this? Then let's not use taxes for it. And that's all I'm saying. Not that it shouldn't be taught, not that it's not important, just you can't take money from everybody to promote what only some people believe.
So simple and so true. Yeah.
So yeah, I do. There's an idea I wanted it. I haven't put it in a book yet. It will be in the next one, and it has to do with this sort of idea we've been talking about, where like a lot of times I'm just like, let's, instead of talking about what we must do or should do, let's talk about what we shouldn't do, right? Because that's often an easier question. So
yes.
One of my, favorite, I think this is in one of the books, one of my favorite, quotations ever is from Charles Kettering, who said, a question well posed is half solved, right? And the corollary to that is a question that's not well posed can't be solved at all, because you don't even know what you're trying to do.
Except by accident.
Which isn't really working out that well. Mm-hmm. So lately, something that occurred to me is, if you put 20 people in a room and say, what does it mean to be educated? You'll get 25, 30, 40 answers, right? And they'll quote people, and Dewey says this, and Aristotle says this, and Richard Feynman says this, and all these, right? Hillary Clinton says this. On the other hand, if you were to put those same 20 people in a room and say, when would you say that somebody's uneducated? And I think that's a much easier bar, right? If you can't read, you might be a perfectly nice person and capable in a lot of ways, but you're uneducated, right? If you can't do basic math, you're uneducated. If you can't, understand, if it's easy for people to lie to you, then you're uneducated. And that's why it's easy to lie to you. If you can't play the tuba, can't play tuba, can't throw a fastball, can't cook a scone, can't do whatever. Those are not uneducated. So one of the things I'm going to be suggesting, just as a general policy in the future, is that we stop saying the purpose of all this is to educate kids. The purpose of all this is to prevent uneducated kids from being loosed on the world.
Yes.
That's again, a very different thing.
I can't get past what I know about the pedagogy. So you made the point in your book that this is more, this isn't so much about pedagogy, but I struggle with that point, because critical pedagogy has completely taken over education. And so, and it is very difficult for people who haven't spent a lot of time with critical pedagogues, to understand exactly how frustrating it is to try to have a conversation with people who've bought into that idea, because their definition of what uneducated is not critically conscious. And of course, that means not aware of their oppression. And so we are going to continue to have these fights, if you will, because you and I agree, and probably a host of other people watching this agree, that what an uneducated person is.
Uh-huh.
However, a huge percentage of the people involved in education and politics in America right now will listen to us and go, well, no, that's not even the beginning of it.
Right. Which again takes us back to commandment 2. If we're going to fight about it, let's not do it. Are we going to fight about whether you should know the alphabet? We are not. Are we going to fight about whether you should be able to count to 100? We are not. So those two things, you could just say, that's the bar for being uneducated. If you can't do those two things, okay, that's kind of a dumb bar. Let's say you should be able to actually read a passage that you have that contains words you've never seen before and figure out what they mean. Okay, are we going to fight about that? I don't think we're going to. Are we going to fight about, yes, I should be able to, add 2 fractions. I should be able to figure out the percentage of something. I should be able to, all the things that you have to do to just keep society running. We're not going to fight about those. Are we going to fight about whether you've got a sufficient understanding of privilege? Yeah, we're going to fight like hell about that. So you know what? Let's not do that.
Yeah, and I love that. And we both love that. And again, I bet there are people watching this going, here. But what we are up against, of course, are, convincing we'd have to do that with voting, I suppose, but convincing the people who make these decisions that they need to listen to us and not take our money anymore, instead of the people who are lobbying for them to take our money. And that's a big challenge. But so it's worth
but you have to give people the vocabulary to do it. And that's
right.
Irrationality, innumeracy, illiteracy, no electives, no politics. That's a vocabulary that you can use to, if somebody's pushing back against you and say, really, should we have this? Should we have this? Should we be doing this? Should we make them defend it? Right. Because right now they're on offense.
Right.
And that needs to change. Right.
And the last question I'll ask you about this book, because I think we've done a pretty good job of explaining what you mean by fairness in education, what you mean by adequate education, how we talk about these things with the 3 I's. But there may be people who say, what about the special needs kids? Now, I think you addressed this fairly well in here, but I want to give you the chance to answer it.
I mean, so the first thing I would say is special means special. It actually means something. It means you don't build a system to handle. You don't build a system around the special cases. You find a different way to handle that. The second thing then is, as always, you come back and say, what is the goal that we have? What are we trying to do, right? Again, there are people who are maybe perfectly nice people, and there are certain things they could do, but are they ever going to be able to do the things we expect of the standard citizen? That's what you do, is you deal with the, what's the standard we're setting? And if for some reason you have to work outside of that, then you have to work outside of it. But I think I quote our state Supreme Court, talking about, they stuck this word educable in. They said an adequate education is one that provides each educable student. And that's a word that nobody has ever talked about in the history of our state. It appears in this one court decision, and then they never come back to it. Nobody's ever sat down and looked at it and said, at what point, it's a little like uneducated, uneducable. There are certain people, it's like, this is never going to happen. And so at what point? So I guess my summary would be, if you have an honest discussion about it where nobody's trying to get one over on anybody else, and you are saying, what is our goal? What are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? And what authority do we have?
Sure.
Then I think that kind of, my contribution, just say, if you can restrict it to that conversation, we might actually have a chance of coming up with something that deals with it. But I can say with certainty that if we don't have that conversation, we are going to have people just fighting about money.
Yeah.
Which is what we have now. Right.
Yep. And that's a perfect segue into the next book, which is Stop Lying About Education Savings Accounts, otherwise known as ESAs, cornerstone of school choice in most states. Because in this absolutely incredible book that I would like to give to Corey DeAngelis, I say give. I'm slightly less polite ways of referring to, but I won't say them here. I don't want to involve you in that. I should note that Ian makes it very clear multiple times that he's neither for nor against ESAs. So please understand the views of the channel, maybe slightly more aggressive than the author, who has just laid it out logically and factually for you and is not necessarily taking a position one way or the other, except to say that the arguments that have been made in favor of them don't really hold water as they've been expressed and as the ESAs are currently designed. And what I love about this book is you break them down to those arguments. You make it, you sort of give the argument and then you refute it. So one of those is that ESAs save money, and that they'll save money. And the way you presented this is so brilliant, where you did the math. I mean, guys, the math is here. We have compare it to a boat trip. What happens if one person says, yeah, I'm not going to ride on the boat trip that's $500. I'm going to take a cab and meet you guys on the other side. And the club person's like, hey, we're saving money. And that's the money saved is going to pay for the $20 for the cab ride. And I'm reading this like, that's absurd. And yet it's exactly the argument that they make. But you probably saw on the show, the Reason show, that I was trying to challenge that no, guys, it's not, we're going to take the money from here and put it over here. It's not even that.
Right. Yeah.
And
but that's all they've got very complicated formulas and you can always hide behind it, which is, again, bare minimum. I'm just like, okay. And I worked on that and talked to a lot of people. It's like, how simple can you make this? And that's as simple as I could make it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And of course you worked your way up to the, New Hampshire specific example. But I'm sorry, folks, if you can read this book and come away saying, no, but it saves money, then I think you might need to go back and get that adequate education that we've been talking about with the basic arithmetic, because it really is very basic arithmetic. You wouldn't run your home budget this way. And I've been arguing for years that these budgets are going to explode. I've been proven right already. Look at Arizona, look at Indiana, look at these states. They're already facing these problems. Florida claims it's not, but we'll see. I think there's some interesting accounting going on down there. But the other point that you made is, because people will say in the same breath that it saves money, they'll say, it's my money. It's my money. You're giving me my money. And I love this lovely little drawing. This is so perfect. It says, give me my education dollars so I can spend them the way I want. But it's holding them up to get them from someone else. It's not your money.
Yeah.
And there are a few little drawings like that where, the person is basically pointing at a third party. In a free market, there's not a third party.
Right.
So then you went on and you talked about the argument that it is a free market. And one of my that's past the public school replacement, but I want to jump to it. What was the name you gave it? It's not a free market. It's a freebie market, isn't it?
Yeah, which is different.
That's very different. Very, very different
rules. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that was absolutely hilarious, because that's exactly what it is. And people are basically demanding, here's the picture for the freebie market, where it's like pointing the gun at the third party. Right. So all the people saying it's my money and it's a free market, you dismantled that one right quick. Talk to us a little bit about the specifics of why it's not a free market. I mean, it's obvious to me, but people might still be going.
I mean, so it's a lot of this. It's obviously in the book, but basically in a free market, all the incentives are different, right? You're trying to you're spending your money on yourself. And Milton Friedman had a really nice 2x2 graph where he talked about the 4 ways to spend money, right? You can spend your money on yourself. You can spend your money on somebody else. You can spend somebody else's money on you, or somebody else's money on somebody else. And so in a free market, you're up in the upper corner. You're spending your money on what you want. And so that's a completely voluntary thing. And that's where competition actually works, because other people, if I want you to give me your money, I'd better do something that's better or cheaper or both, right? And then next year, somebody else will come in. As soon as you disconnect the my money thing and I can get the money from somewhere else, I completely lose interest in how much anything costs. And you've talked about this with, the pricing of schools and saying, oh, well, now that everybody has $3,000 or $5,000 or $7,000, I guess that should be the minimum that I charge. And so the way that the vendors are going to price things is going to change completely, that they should go up rather than down. That's one
right.
of the differences from a free market, right?
And that will affect the price that everyone pays, even the people not using the ESAs. This is what I've
Yeah.
warned people about. It's
Yes.
not just affecting you. You are skewing the entire market. The price of everything, just like with healthcare, the
Yeah.
price is going to change because of this giant pot of money that's now being redistributed. And people are being very dishonest, in my opinion, about whether they know they're being dishonest or they don't. I think the people pushing school choice know perfectly well they're being dishonest. And I think a lot of the parents who are eager to get their hands on the money might not realize it, or they're sort of being willfully blind to it. But there's no way you could be walking around thinking that this isn't going to affect how the gymnastics center prices their gymnastics classes, or how the curriculum developer prices their stuff, or the
Right.
tutor even.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they
Yes.
raise their prices? I would, if I were taking the money,
Of
which I'm
course.
not. But if I
Right.
were, of course I'd raise my prices.
Yeah. And my first exposure to this was Pell Grants, where, I went to a state university,
Yep.
and when I showed up, it was $500 a semester, all the classes you want. By the time I left, it was, I think, 3,000. And that was in the span of 4 years. And that was just when Pell Grants were ramping up. And it's like, well, they're not idiots. They're like, well, everybody's got $3,000 to spend. I guess that's what we should charge.
That's right.
So I saw it right away, and it was just like, that was crazy.
When you
Um,
also make the point that they're basing the current outlay, the
mhm,
money that you're getting for ESA, they're basing it on the current price per student, price per
right.
pupil, not on what it actually costs to
Uh,
run a school.
yeah.
It's like,
Right.
this is what we're spending. Well, you've not sat down and figured out if that's what you should be spending. Should it even
Right.
cost that much? And then you use that as your floor. Everything's only going to go up from there. So if
Yes.
you're spending 13,000, 18,000, whatever your district is
Right.
spending, they're going to use that as the floor forever and always. You're never going
Yeah.
to get it cheaper. So
Right.
the
It's
people who
never
say it's
going
going
to
to
go down.
reduce the cost are straight up lying to you.
Right. You get a ratchet effect, and that you don't get in a free market. In a free market, everybody's always trying to lower prices. And here it's like, why would I lower prices? I know they're going to go up, and I know that people are going to get the money from other people. And so, okay, here we go. Yeah. So everything moves in all of the various arguments about how competition works really depend on it being your own money. And as soon as it's not your money, it all falls apart, and you get pretty much the opposite of what you wanted. Things get
Right.
worse, things get more expensive, right? They
Right.
never get cheaper, and there's no reason for them to get better because,
Yep.
you're not paying for it. What do you care?
And then you made another point about how we often talk in terms of, parents are the customers of school.
Mhm.
Parents are and I kind of used to be on board with that years ago, where I would say like, oh, parental rights, whatever, because I
Yeah.
obviously support parental rights. And I would like for the schools to treat parents and kids more like they are beneficiaries of this thing than they do. But in truth, as you point out, the taxpayers are the
Right.
customers.
Yep.
And the taxpayers, some of whom are children and some, are parents, and
Mhm.
then their families by extension, really are and ought to be treated as the customers and the beneficiaries of
Absolutely.
the system. And if we focus on the parents, or even the teachers or the schools or anybody else, we're incorrect.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the most important things that has to change in our conversation. And I think it's one of the hardest, because people have just heard this. It's like a hypnotic suggestion. The parents are the customers. We have to make the parents happy. We have to make the children happy by making, you have to make,
Right.
and it's really, it gets away from the idea, and it discourages the taxpayers from ever standing up and saying, look, what you're taking my money for is to give me an educated citizenry, and I'm not getting it. So something has to change, because if you stand up and say that, you get oh my God, you hate kids, you hate education, you're
Right.
just a terrible person. And all the attacks become very personal. They never actually deal with, are you saying the kids shouldn't be able to read? Or you saying, so it's a very difficult thing, but I will keep writing about it because I think it's really important to just stop and say, no, I'm the customer. You're the customer. That guy over there who's about to lose his house because he can't afford his school tax, he's the customer, and he's buying an educated citizenry. And the parents who, ideally the parents who could afford to educate the kids would just do that, and he'd be paying only to help the others.
Right.
But that's what he's paying for, right? And if
Right.
he's not getting it, I think I wrote a piece once called, the problem isn't school funding, it's school refunding. Nobody gets refunds. You should be able to go to your school and say, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, so give me my money back.
That's right. And the problem too is with this, freebie market and the notion that the parent is the customer, not a beneficiary of this daycare and, all this other stuff, is that it makes it that much harder to hold anyone accountable. And in particular with the ESAs, and I've mentioned this, I think I said it in the Reason Show, I've said it on my channel, that I've said the government strings are going to happen because they have to happen. And I, as a taxpayer, want them there. And people are horrified, like, but you don't want government strings. And I'm like, that's why I don't want the money. Right. I don't want the money there because I know that the only way to hold people accountable, not blow it on, skiing lessons or whatever the things, remember that Ian says we need for adequate education, the reading, the literacy and all the stuff. If the parent can spend it on whatever they think is appropriate, there will be people that spend it on things that have nothing to do with what we, the taxpayers, would think is the must have. And then what do? We can't get our money back either.
Right.
So the strings have to be there. And if you keep treating the parents like they're a customer and then you give them other people's money, the customer gets to buy whatever the heck they want.
Yeah.
You're not a customer.
Yeah. The customer's always right, but that's really not how it should work.
No. And that's why it's an entitlement. But say that to people, and in particular, the people who are currently stumbling for it, which are Republicans, conservatives, all this, who love to fancy themselves, on the side of free markets or, rights and all this. And I'm like, but it's literally an entitlement program that you're building.
It is. And this is where, for me, the question of like, do they actually know what they're saying or they don't know what they're saying comes in, because I listen to some of the arguments, I think, and I've had this where people will express it privately and they'll say, well, I can't actually say this, but really we're just trying to crush the public schools. And which is why I talk in the book about how that's not going to happen.
No. No, it does not. And so it doesn't improve on it. It doesn't eliminate it. It does neither.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything. If anything, historically, we've seen that it grows them. So, that's again, what the book is really about is just, let's just put everybody's cards on the table. Let's not treat this like some game of poker where I have these cards, and if I can outwit you, then I can take your money, or you can take mine, or we can both take that guy's, or whatever. It's just, let's just be honest about our goals. And I think, having said that, I think one of the things that would happen is if people sat down and actually started explicitly articulating their goals, they would find out, one, that often they don't even know what they are. And two, even the people they think are allies are going to be opposed sometimes. Well, wait, that's not what I'm trying to do. Well, yeah, but that's what we're trying to do, right? Again, the word we are trying to,
exactly
make the public school smaller or get kids better educations or whatever.
Yeah, I would like to start with just getting what it is we claim to want, which is an educated, a not uneducated.
Right, yes. We would like to not be
population.
We would like to not have uneducated people voting. Let's just start there. That's my simple thing. I don't want uneducated people to vote. And I don't want to say, like, I'm talking about skills and processes, not what they believe. You could be perfectly educated and believe that we should all be communists. You're not uneducated. I can't make that argument, but we just happen to disagree. So, okay, that's fine. That's what you should be doing.
But if you took it to your other point of people who are hard to lie to,
yes,
then we wouldn't have communists.
Well, okay. That's a second order effect, right? Yes, all those things eventually. It's sort of like the the no politics thing. Eventually leads to schools of size 0, right? That's in the limit, and then everybody
Yeah.
just educates their own kids.
Yeah.
In the same way, yes, if people are educated and they can read and they do read and they do know how to think and they do recognize all the ways that they're lied to, then yes, your hope at least would be, yes, a lot of very popular political ideas would simply become, jokes.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. So I guess the final word on the ESA thing is that they are purely additive. So in other
Yes.
words, you're just growing budgets. They
Mhm.
do not improve on the standard model because they're really not set up to do that. There's no
Yeah.
way to provide for that at all, whether the standard model is the public school or the education the kid's getting who leaves
Right.
and goes elsewhere. You
Right.
have no way at all to make sure that that's an improvement.
Right.
Might be, might not be. It's not going to improve the school they left that they're
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
It's not lowering their budget. It's not doing anything. It's just, an empty seat theoretically.
Right.
But the idea that more empty seats, that's the whole smaller class size, like automatically makes anything better is we've shown many times over with research that doesn't work either. So
Right.
all of these arguments for
Doesn't do-
these things don't really hold water. So people who support them are going to need to, well, first of all, read this book, and you can get it at Bare Minimum Books. Or, and then go back to the drawing board and rethink your arguments. Is that really true? What
Right.
you're saying? Because he's taken it apart here. It's not, I'm sorry. I don't think it's refutable. I just don't.
Yeah.
They've
And
added
again, I would just like people to have the conversation, the honest
Yeah.
conversation where they say, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is why I'm trying to do it, and this is why I think I have the power to do it.
Right.
Those are always my 3 questions that if you're proposing any policy, you should be very clear on the answer to those 3
Right.
questions before you
Right.
start talking about technique and, rates and who's going to take whom from what and what rules. First, can you do it? And the third of those questions is actually the most important, because in many cases, the answer is just a flat no. And, there's no point. I mean, the analogy I use a lot is like, we could get together with some friends and say, okay, we need some money. You know what? Let's knock over a liquor store. And then somebody might come in and say, well, liquor stores are da-da-da. Let's do a convenience store. They're open early. And how are we going to get away? And how are we going to split the money? And nobody's stopping to go, should we actually be stealing at all? Because if the answer to that is no, then all the plans are pointless. They're all talking about how to do something that we should not be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, this idea of like, should we be spending tax money on education? A lot of people would say the answer to that is a flat no. I think there is room in this sort of libertarian case for it, for saying there is a very limited, very focused, very targeted reason, situations where you might do that, right? For the same reason that we would have police officers in courts, right? To protect my rights. So, but nobody's having that conversation. Everybody is jumping right to what, should we have this, and should it be 300% of the poverty level, or open, just open enrollment or whatever. To which when they talk about the universal, I'm like, great, when are we getting universal food stamps? Because I would like free food, even though I can afford to feed myself. And when am I getting, my mortgage support? And, I want my Gun Freedom Act, my Gun Freedom account. I want you to put money in it every month, and I can only spend that on guns and ammunition, So, well, you don't need that stuff. It's like, yeah.
Exactly. And, and that gets down to we have these stupid conversations about who needs what and who gets to decide. And then what happens if they give you money? And at least to your point in the book, at least with something like an EBT or SNAP card, it can only be used on food. It can only be used on certain foods. It can't be used on beer and cigarettes, whatever.
Right.
And so there's your accountability. It can only be used on these things, but things like ESAs are more akin to universal basic income, where I give you a pile of money and say, go spend it on this laundry list of things. And some states don't even have a list yet that you call education, and it's up to the parents. And then they spend it, like I said, on a trip to Disney or a brand new gaming computer or who knows what. And then when they don't have money to spend on the reading tutor, they come back again and go, I need more. And it's like, who's holding them accountable for misusing it in the first place?
Yeah. Yeah, you can't. And so that is, again, coming back to the standard commerce model.
Yeah.
If it's even to say, well, I'm going to buy a reading curriculum for my kid. And it's like, if you buy the reading curriculum and you just put it on a shelf, or you buy the reading curriculum and you try it and it doesn't work for your kid and he doesn't learn anything, why am I paying for it?
That's right.
What I want to pay for is that your kid
The
actually learns
results.
the alphabet and then learns to sound out words and then learns to use a dictionary. And, that's what I want to pay for, because that's what I need him to do. Right.
I would rather see the situation work such that, you can educate your child as you see fit. And at the end of the year, we're going to get, you're going to go take a test.
Mm-hmm.
And if the kid passes the test, you're going to get a tax credit of X. I mean,
yeah.
It's better than I don't like it, but I'm just saying, like, if you're going to talk about things that, where you get your money back.
Right. Yes. But again, then I would bring it back to guns and say, you know what, at the end of the year, I want to show you that my speed is improved on these standard tests and my group size has gone down or whatever. And therefore I want a tax credit to pay for the ammunition that I used and the targets that I had to buy. It's like, it's none of your business. But again, that's
I'm just starting from if the premise is that it's anybody's business whether my kid gets educated or not, such that they can order them to go to school and demand that we all pay a bunch of property taxes to pay for it, then there's probably half a dozen other ways before we just hand them a pile of money.
Right. Yes.
That we could have that conversation about solving that problem.
Right. And so in addition to the standard model of commerce, I mean, a thing I write about a lot is we have a standard model for welfare that we do, which is you demonstrate that you can't afford something that's necessary, and then we give you assistance in a way that you can't spend it on anything else. And there's no reason to treat education differently than food and heat and internet connection and housing, right? I mean, food and housing, for sure, you will die if you don't have those. Whereas if you don't have education, I think people are increasingly demonstrating that you can stay alive well. So
not just stay alive, you could have a Starbucks budget.
That's right. So which of those is more important, right? Why are we treating education as if it's at a different level of importance? It's not. It's a thing that's important and we want people to have it. But we have a well-established way to help people who need help and to not, it's like somewhere I had a thing called 4 ways to spend money, right? And it's not Milton Friedman's, but it's like, okay, the first thing, if you're going to spend tax money, you shouldn't. But if you do, it's like, don't give it to people who don't need it. Make sure that it's being spent on what it's supposed to be getting you. 3, make sure that you actually get that thing, right? And I forget what the 4th was, but it's like, these are just so simple.
Right.
And
to your point, education's it's a sticky wicket, because unlike food, which is like box of food, right? And you got it, whether you ate it all or threw some in the garbage. I mean, we can't do anything about that, but education is an intangible. It's tough to say, like you said, they buy the curriculum or they go to the tutor or whatever. How do we know that they learned anything?
So you could say health is an intangible, but I could say, once a year you'll go in and we'll check your triglycerides and we'll check your blood pressure and we'll see, we'll check your weight. We can check those things. We have, and I would make this argument, if we can't tell how well a kid is reading, if that's really an intangible, then we should just shut the whole enterprise down.
Oh, no. I would agree with that. I would agree that they should have a test.
So not educate, and this is why I like talking about uneducated in opposition to the educated. Yes, there are many, many intangibles about education, but I can actually, and this is where I think I talk about I call it the I cubed test for innumeracy, irrationality, illiteracy. I mean, I can put you in a room and start lying to you, and I can test whether you can tell. Okay, that's not an intangible at all. That's true. A completely testable thing. Yeah. And so in the same way that we would treat medicine, that we would treat, those are things where we have an idea of what it is we're trying to do. Same thing here. It's only when we just start treating education as this very different fantasy kind of weird undefined thing that we run into these problems. We're like, well, we don't really know. It's like, no, I think we can tell whether somebody can read at the third grade level. And if we can't, then let's stop fooling ourselves.
Right.
Because
the problem we have is not that we can't tell, it's that we can tell and then we ignore the results.
well, okay, see,
Then we do nothing about it, you know. So
that's a different argument.
do we have the same owl? No,
I
it's not the
do.
same, but it's real similar.
Which owl?
There's one over your shoulder.
That guy?
And I have one right back there.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Funny?
Yeah, it looks very
They're
similar.
real
Yeah.
similar. I just noticed that. So one last question I want to ask you is, what of all of the, I don't want to say arguments, but like question / like argumentative kind of questions that you've ever had about education, what was the one, or what's one that comes to mind that sort of frustrates you the most, in the sense that it's not an easy one to answer, or that you feel like you have to struggle to deal with that person when they're asking you the question about education?
Well, I think it's not so much that people are asking questions about education, it's when they're making statements about education.
Okay, so statement then. What kind of a statement?
So what kind of, I mean, the things that frustrate me the most are, and it's not even the thing they say, it's that they clearly have, what frustrates me most is when people have not, and you can tell that they haven't really thought through the things like, why are we trying to do this? That's the thing. I think everything starts there, And so whenever people saying, well, this would be better than that. And it's like, so let me actually clarify that as a statement. There are certain statements that people make where they say, is this necessary? And it's like, that's not even correct English. Is this necessary to someone for something? Okay, that's a complete thought. Would this be better? Would this be better than what, for whom? Right? And so I think the things that frustrate me the most are when people act like ChatGPT, where they just repeat words that they've heard. Oh, EFAs will save us money. Okay, like the guys who are saying that, many of whom are actually in departments of education, they've just heard this and they're just saying it, and they haven't stopped to think it through, and they haven't. So that I think in that sense, the state as a general class, the things that frustrate me the most are where people are expressing things that aren't even thoughts. They're just words that they picked up someplace and carried around, and now they're dumping them on you. And they haven't, that they haven't thought about it, because if they had thought about it, they'd realize that what they're saying, not even that it's wrong. It's not even wrong. It doesn't rise to the level where you could say it's right or wrong, because there's no actual meaning in it. That's the thing that frustrates me the most. And so it's the thing I spend the most time doing in conversations, is like, what do you actually mean by this? What do you have a goal? do you know what that is? How could you tell if you're meeting your goal? You've said you had a goal. Well, what would that look like if you actually succeeded, right? So that, I think, more than any specific, technical or methodological or political question anybody asks, it's the questions where it's like, you can't even address it because they haven't even said anything. I think that those are the things that annoy me the most.
Yeah, man after my own heart. I so often run into people, and I find I have to stop them and just back them up and say, like, to what end?
Yeah,
like,
right.
How do you know where? For right. Who pays, for what purpose? How will you know if you've succeeded? All of these questions,
right?
And people get very frustrated when you ask them these questions. Sometimes angry. And that's when the straw men start flying at you.
Right.
You just want people to be stupid. You just want to hurt poor kids. You just want this. You just want that. And like, no, but that would be very convenient for you.
Yeah, it would. And I mean, I would like to give a plug to a guy. He's dead, but he wrote a book, and I read it when I first got to college. I don't even know who I'd be if I hadn't read this book. It's called Less Than Words Can Say, and it's by a guy named Richard Mitchell.
Okay.
And
My list now.
He basically changed my mind about how language works and the importance of being clear and what happens when you're not clear. What happens to people when they say things and they don't even know what they're saying, and what kind of mischief that leads to. And once you read it, you everywhere you look, you just see this happening, where people are just expressing what they would call thoughts, but they're really just strings of words that haven't been examined. And it can be painful to force them to examine that, because then, you know, your sense of certainty goes away. You were certain a couple of minutes ago, and, you know, now you're not.
And now you're not.
That's painful. And the lack of certainty, I think, is one of the things that people find most painful, you know.
I've noticed that, and it's something that I don't really understand. And that must be something about me, like personality wise, because I can't remember a time going back, like little kid wise, where ambiguity upset me to the level it upsets most people. So whether it's ambiguity, uncertainty, whatever, I just remember being a person. It might be because I had a lot of it. I had health problems as a little bitty kid. I was in the hospital. I had all kinds of personal things going on in my young life that were like, you know, we don't know what's going to happen next. So I just am not a person, you know, people say, well, what are you going to, you don't know this, you don't like, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't need to know. I'm comfortable with not knowing everything. That doesn't mean I'm not curious. It doesn't mean that I don't want to learn more or find out more about things. But if you tell me, you know, that I don't have an answer to these important questions, and that somehow I should be upset about that, I'm like, but no, that's the road to perdition right there. If you start getting really worked up about all the things you can't answer definitively, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, you know, to go back to like what is worth teaching, when I say you should learn something about science, I don't necessarily mean you have to know about, you know, electron orbitals. You don't necessarily have to know Maxwell's laws. But here's what you should know. You should know that, you know, basically nothing, you can't say anything with any kind of confidence until you've done the experiment, and the experiment should work a certain way. But more importantly than that, you can never know whether you're right or not. That is built in. That is rule number one. You will never know. And so to actually, in my sense, to be a scientist, not to be a professional scientist, but just somebody who looks at the world in a scientific way, you know, just you're totally an amateur. That is the first thing that you have to know, is that all of your theories are provisional, right? And they're provisional because there may be questions that you haven't even thought to ask that would give an answer different than the one you think that you should get. And that is, if you go back and look the history of science, that is the history of science. We think this is going on. Somebody goes, yeah, but what about that? Right? What about that pesky mercury that's not in the right place? Well, damn it. You know, and they don't just go, well, we got 99.9% of it. It's like, no, we got to explain that.
You mean it's not just in that place to mess with my computer equipment?
Yeah, right. It's just a glitch in the matrix. But then you find that you have to go back and revisit all of your assumptions, and you go from Newtonian mechanics to Einstein's mechanics. And we know Einstein's not right because for him, space is continuous, and in quantum mechanics, it's not. And so, okay, something's got to break there. So those are the things, but that attitude is like, I have kids that I hang out with, and that is the attitude I want them to have, right? First, that this is all interesting, and you can actually figure things out, and you can set up conditions where things have, well, I predicted this, but that happened. But I want them to really understand at a deep level that what we have are just guesses.
Yep.
They're just guesses. And as soon as and to me, that's where you cross over from, say, science to religion, when you forget that this is just a guess. This is just a story. This is just the idea that I'm using to work with now. And that becomes your only idea, and it must be the idea that everybody else has. And that gets back to certainty, right? Because people hate being uncertain. One of the reasons people will join religion or join cults or join political parties is there is strength in numbers, and it's not just physical strength. You can beat people up and take their money,
Mm-hmm.
but mental strength. We're like, well, if
Yeah.
all these people agree with me, I must be right. And that is why, on the left, as soon as somebody strays off the reservation, they get mercilessly beaten down, because part of the value of being in that kind of monolithic, sect, cult, whatever, is as soon as somebody's doubting it, now you have to start doubting yourself. That hurts. So, your life.
I've never wanted to be any
Right.
part of that. I don't
Right.
I just don't get
you
it.
had certain life experiences. I mean, I actually have a book on how I, growing up, was never religious. And I always wondered, what would that be like to be religious, right? And I would ask people about it, and just nobody could explain it. And then I got and read, bought a gun, read all these books, and liberty became my religion, but I didn't know it until I started teaching math for Ask Dr. Math, and had to go back and explain to people about how premises work. And if you start with different premises, you get to different results. And there is no, universal set of premises. And I'm like, oh, but I used to believe that there was. And it's like, oh my God, I was religious. I was religious for some number of years because I thought, this is the answer. This is the only answer. And if you don't see that it's the answer, you must be some kind of idiot. And liberty sort of made me religious, and mathematics sort of saved me from being religious. So now I now understand, and I have that experience where I can remember, this is just the way it is. And there's no discussing it.
Makes sense.
So, yeah.
Well, I want to put in a plug for your books and for your blog. So I'm going to show people those two things.
Thank you.
And I definitely, like I said, I want people to, if I could literally like force people to read these. I only care about liberty up to the point of wanting people to read what I read. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
So this is Bare Minimum Books, bareminimumbooks.com. And there are, 17 titles, I believe?
Yes, 17.
And I really want to make a plug for the formatting. These books are a joy. Okay. If you can read these in an hour. I mean, I'm not kidding. This is just like so simple, laid out like that, clear, concise, flip through it. You don't even realize you're consuming something so vitally important because it's such a small, easy to manage little volume. And, the first one, the fairness, is a little more dense in the sense of there's more going on here. Notice all of my, my posts, but so good. And now I've got to work my way through the other titles because I love the format and I've just learned so much. I thought I knew, I wouldn't say all there was to know, but I thought I had nailed my ESA arguments. Not even close. I was almost there, but I was not really close on explaining to people how they don't save money. You did that so beautifully. And then how they're not an improvement on the standard model, because that was really hard. So many people would say, but my kid's in a terrible school and now I'm going to get him in a better school. And I'd be stuck like, but that's not really the question we're trying to answer, is it?
Yeah, no.
And then the other thing I want people to be aware of is Granite Grok, which is granitegrok.com. And this is Ian's blog, which again, I'm working my way through. I discovered a movie I didn't even know existed because you talked about it, which was Guns N' Moses. I'm like, why did I never see this? I now have to get this movie.
Yeah. So this is not my blog, by the way. It's a blog run by Steve McDonald. It was started by him and Skip Murphy. What they do is very graciously let me write whatever I want.
Oh, well, that was
the deal. It was like, and as Skip put it early on, I wrote a couple of things and he said, you make my head hurt, but in a good way, and so he's sort of my target audience. A lot of times when I'm writing for Grok is I'm looking for a thing, and it's what makes me write is I know that he thinks a certain thing and he hasn't looked at it from this direction. And
I see. Okay. Like, my bad.
Ugh. Yeah, so there's a lot of great stuff there, but I am just one of the contributors, and they, like I said, very graciously have never tried to make me do anything. They're just like,
well, y'all can go read Granite Grok anyway, and then find Ian's work there.
And there is an author page, and I think Jody showed it to you, and you were just looking. And I would love it if people would do that, because I don't write like, uh-oh, it's Thursday, I'd better write something. I mostly write, and I think you did this, we just heard something you were responding to, and I don't remember. Your own somebody.
Yarn Brook.
Right? Yeah, your own Brooke. And you're just like, okay, I just have to say. And a lot of the things I write are actually that way. They're just like, okay, I can't let this go anymore. So
yeah, that's
I just got to say
all
something.
Day.
But yeah,
I know.
and
lately more than ever, I used to be more, like today I'm going to make something, or when I've got to make a video or I've got to write something. Yeah. And lately I try to be motivated by the drive. Like I have to say this, because that's usually when I say it well, as opposed to feeling like it's Tuesday, I have to write something.
Yeah.
And I can understand that, but there's a lot of good stuff here. I want people to know about it and to read the books, because you're getting a lot of feedback about these issues about education. A lot of it is not full thoughts, first of all, or straight up lies. And then there's a fair amount that is getting swept under the rug right now because we're distracted by other things. There's only so much you can pay attention to at one time. And yet I can't think of many things more important than your children if you're a parent, or than where your taxpayer dollars are going locally when you're a taxpayer, because this is where most of them are going. I mean, where I live, I don't know about you, but something like 65% of my property taxes go to schooling.
Yeah.
And so I care greatly. That's a lot of money. They just raised it another $1,000 just this year. Yeah. So even if I weren't deeply, engaged in this, I would be like, what? And I would recommend that other people do the same, because education, or whatever you want to call it, what kind of next generation we're producing with our tax dollars will be the ones making the laws and the rules and deciding the fate, of us and our children.
No, I think it's absolutely right. I'm trying to make my contribution that it's very difficult to even hear a conversation for any length of time about education that doesn't veer off into numbers and statistics and money and rates. And I'm trying to just gently have people come back and say, so you're not going to see that in my books. I'm not going to talk about how Florida relates to California, because in the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you ask yourself questions like, what are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do it? And can we do it? So I am always trying to bring people back to that kind of thing. Is this a free market? No, it's not, because that's how that would look. And this is completely different, right? Are we saving money? You don't need to look at, all the statistics for 50 states and all the counties. You can just take this little example and go, if you see this, then you don't need to look at all of the numbers, because you know what must be happening. Right. So I hope, thank you for the plug, because I just want this to get out there. I just think the thoughts are important. The ideas are important. And the more people who know them, I think the better even if people don't agree with me, I think we'll just have better conversations.
100%. Absolutely true. Well, thank you so much, Ian. It was a pleasure. And I loved these books so much. And I'm so grateful that you sent them to me. I mean, when Jody first wrote me, I was like, okay, you're going to send me books. That's awesome. Right. But so if somebody's kind enough to send me books, I always read them. But I forget to read them. I was like, couldn't
inhaling them. Yeah.
I did.
Just so you know, I don't know if it came through, but each of these books is essentially a talk.
And it comes through. Yeah. That comes through. Yeah.
And that's the way they're created, is I actually take something and try to get it as simple as I can and give a talk, and we record it and I transcribe it. And so I hope that it sounds like me talking to you.
Yes, it does.
That's exactly what I want you to forget your reading. I want you to it's the closest thing to an audio book that you can have on paper is what I'm going
Absolutely. For. And they just read through so quickly. And like I said, you put things so simply that you come away either questioning everything you thought before. Like I said, I was the girl who was like, you got to teach American history. You got to do that. It's just, and after reading that, I was like, no, actually, you don't gotta.
I don't want to teach history.
No, and now I'm exactly the opposite. And I'm like, please don't.
Exactly. See, that's what I'm going for. Exactly that, where people are like, I thought I knew this, but
That's exactly right. And
I
that's so
don't.
I love that. I love when I, I'm not a person who walks around all certain of everything, although people accuse me of that. But I do walk around with very definite opinion. I have very strong
Mhm.
opinions. And I love it when somebody can show me something a different way and be like,
Yeah.
because that means my brain still functions.
Yeah.
It's not calcified to the point where it's like it's over. I'm done growing. So I thank you for that. We sort of reduced my mental age by a decade or so, which is always fun. So
Excellent.
anyway, thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Please, like and share and all the things so that more people can hear these ideas and get exposure to Ian. And I really thank you for listening. So we'll see you next time.